Hello, and welcome to Cracked Love Chronicles. While there's no easy way to discover that your spouse is unfaithful, some methods are certainly more painful than others. Finding out about my wife's betrayal from my mother ranks high on the list of humiliating experiences. It was an added embarrassment I could have done without. Before I tied the knot with Darlene, my mother cautioned me against her and urged me to seek out a nice Italian girl instead. I ignored her advice, and now, with undeniable proof of her correctness, she didn't hesitate to remind me of her warnings. My name is Tony, and as I arrived to pick up my 10-year-old son, Arthur, from my mother's house, I noticed her tears. The last time I had seen her cry was a decade ago, at my father's funeral. Initially, I feared my son was hurt, but then I spotted him behind her, happily engaged with the brand new iPhone I had gifted him just 2 days prior. A wave of concern washed over me, and I wondered if something had happened to Darlene, my wife of 20 years. With tears welling in my eyes, I inquired about her well-being. My mother nodded in reassurance and gestured for me to sit down, sending Arthur outside to play on the swing. After Darlene dropped off Arthur, he showed me his new iPhone, which had unknowingly recorded Darlene during the car ride. My mother then played a recording from my wife's phone call, where she was making plans with a man named Scott for a weekend getaway to Las Vegas. She claimed it was a business trip and mentioned they would have a long weekend of fun, leaving early Friday morning. At that moment, she was on her way to his house after dropping off our son at her mother-in-law's, and Scott explained that he would meet her there in 30 minutes. She should use the key under the big planter to let herself in. She had hired Scott's attorney to file for her divorce from me. She and Scott bragged that when they returned from their trip, she would tell me the truth, claiming I beat her, with a black-eye courtesy of Scott, and have me arrested for spousal abuse. Jailed, she would take everything I owned, including my son. They laughed at how I was just a stupid, boring, clueless car salesman. Darlene said that soon I would be Bubba's new. My love interest found herself in prison, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of Scott moving into my home. He would take my place, sharing intimate moments with my wife in our bed, forcing my son to call him dad, and ensuring I would never see my son again. That marked the end of the recording, and my wife remained oblivious to the revelation of her hidden life. For a fleeting moment, I entertained the idea of reconciliation if she ended the affair immediately. But then the reality hit me. There was no hope for a happy ending. They weren't just orchestrating my divorce, they were plotting my downfall. In just a few minutes, my love shattered. My feelings for my wife transformed into a mix of anger and disgust. I couldn't grasp how or why she could harbor such hatred towards me. Why couldn't she simply file for divorce? Why did she feel the need to frame me for a crime, ruin my life, take my son away, and have me imprisoned? She and Scott seemed intent on destroying me, and now I felt compelled to respond in kind. As the smallest kid in all my elementary school classes, I quickly learned that if I didn't stand up decisively against any bully, the torment would never cease. I may not have won those fights, but none of those experiences were in vain. If anyone ever attempted to bully or confront me again, when the tough guy swung a punch, I would seize his fist and bite his wrist until he released his grip. Then, I would swiftly bend back one or two of his fingers until they snapped. It may not have been graceful, but it certainly worked. I knew my opponent by name and voice. He was a colleague of my wife at the same real estate agency. He towered over me, was far more muscular, and exuded a self-centeredness that mirrored my wife's. He lived about half a mile away, and I had been to his place. Gatherings at his place often turned into a showcase of bravado, especially after a few too many drinks. He would boast about his allure, claiming to be a magnet for married women, particularly following a recent medical procedure. As the night wore on and the drinks kept flowing, he made an audacious claim about an injection that supposedly enhanced his size. He jokingly referred to his doctor as the Injector General. I initially dismissed his antics, believing he posed no real threat to my marriage. That was a significant misjudgment on my part. It wasn't that I had faith in Scott, I had faith in my wife. I often found amusement in the antics of men like him. Perpetually doubting their partners, these men seemed to have a knack for keeping tabs on their wives. I once dismissed this behavior as foolish, but now I see they possessed a certain wisdom I lacked. Yet, I couldn't fathom living life as a detective, or, even worse, a jailer. What joy is there in loving someone without trust? My impression of Scott was that of a smug individual, always wearing a self-satisfied grin when we crossed paths. He was unattached, with minimal financial burdens aside from his extravagant car and wardrobe, frequently boasting about his wild lifestyle. La Vida Loco up his number 5. My mother had a Sicilian temper. I wanted to wring her neck until she was dead. My mother whispered, "What will you do?" She asked. I don't know yet, but I'm sure as hell going to make it epic. I wasn't interested in just revenge. I was consumed by visions of their annihilation. It was also a matter of self-preservation. I had to destroy them before they destroyed me, and more importantly, before they destroyed my relationship with my son. Tony, don't do anything rash or violent, my mother said. You need to avoid jail for your son's sake. If you get arrested for assaulting someone, you risk losing custody. Think wisely and use your intellect instead of resorting to violence. As I mentioned before, I'm not a tough individual. I don't associate with those who are. While I have Sicilian roots, I haven't encountered anyone involved in organized crime. Most of my friends are in the car sales business, and our biggest offenses now that cannabis is legal are minor traffic violations. I met my wife when she was the real estate agent from whom I leased an apartment. That week, we had dinner together, and later, she leased a car from me. It may not be the most romantic way to meet, but our marriage has been good for 19 and a half of the 20 years we were together. I believed I had been a good husband. I did most of the cooking. My mother, a chef at several high-end Italian restaurants, taught me to cook. I was pretty good at it, though my mother always said there was room for improvement. A couple of times a year, I bought my wife flowers and showered her with compliments. She needed that, as she had a tendency towards vanity. I never cheated or flirted with other women, and I rarely drank, certainly not since that New Year's Eve a decade ago. I wasn't a movie star in looks, nor was my wife. I didn't have wealth or luxury, but I worked hard to support our family and contributed around the house. I dedicated more time to caring for our son than she did. I won't claim to be the world's greatest lover. With a muscular physique reminiscent of a bodybuilder, she never voiced her discontent, at least not to me. The 3 girls I had been with prior to meeting my future wife also kept their grievances to themselves. In truth, none of them ever claimed to have experienced fireworks or felt the earth move. What on earth did she desire? Her moments with her lover were undoubtedly more thrilling than our time together. They could embrace the carefree spirit of teenagers, unburdened by responsibility. Their affair was forbidden, brimming with novelty and the thrill of the illicit, something they didn't possess with me. They passed their days consumed by the mundane tasks of life, managing bills, grocery shopping, fixing up the house, and assisting a child with homework, all while feigning laughter at a 4th grader's joke. Scott never tended to Darlene when she fell ill or offered comfort as she struggled, unlike the times I had held a cool cloth to her forehead during her sickness. This is the other facet of romance in a marriage, the aspect that distinguishes enduring love from fleeting physical attraction. I concluded that her infidelity was unrelated to this reality. As I reflected on the past, it became evident that my wife had been seeking something beyond our life together. Her sudden late nights, claiming to work late on Wednesdays, raised suspicions. What transpired during those hours remained unclear, but a clue had emerged. While driving my son home, we took a detour past Scott's house, and there it was, my wife's car parked outside. I returned home, emotions overwhelming me, and deleted the damning recording from my son's device. I retreated to my bedroom, switched on the stereo to mask any lingering sounds, and let my emotions flow into my pillow for an hour. When I glanced in the mirror, my eyes were a vivid shade of red and puffy. After a shower, my wife returned home 2 hours later, just in time for dinner. She greeted me with a kiss, as if everything was perfectly normal. I noticed her hair was still damp, a sign she had also just showered. When she asked about my red eyes, I casually explained that some shampoo had accidentally gotten in them. She had brought home the food she adored, and as we settled down for dinner, I inquired about her day, to which she responded with her usual cheerfulness. Nothing remarkable had transpired. She had merely shown a few houses to a couple she mockingly referred to as Lucky L. When she inquired about my day, I responded with a solemn shake of my head and concocted a tale to gently impart a lesson on the repercussions of betrayal. I recounted a story I had stumbled upon online about a man who discovered his wife's infidelity upon returning home early from work. Now, he finds himself behind bars after violently confronting his wife and her lover. Once, his wife had been strikingly beautiful, but now, it seemed he had left her with a shattered smile and a broken spirit. My boyfriend's situation has taken a turn. It seems he won't be engaging with married women anymore, which feels like a fitting consequence for his actions. My wife was taken aback by his choices, questioning why he didn't simply file for divorce. I believe he made the right call. Perhaps he'll face some time behind bars, but if there are any married men on the jury, he might escape conviction. Meanwhile, the woman involved and her partner will bear the emotional weight of this for a long time. In my view, his response was entirely justified. If I were in his position, I would have acted similarly. I gently held my wife's chin, admiring her beautiful teeth, and she looked at me in surprise. However, I wouldn't have been so overt. I wouldn't want to face the consequences. Instead, I would have quietly observed them, waiting for the right moment, and then, concealed by a mask, I would have incapacitated them before unleashing my anger. Thankfully, I am married to a woman who has always remained loyal to me. Isn't that right, dear? My wife, rose from her chair, unsteady and trembling, as she kissed me. Of course, dear, I would never do anything like that. Then she approached the liquor cabinet, poured herself a glass of Bailey's Irish cream, drank it, and poured another. I took my wife's hand and expressed my love for her, emphasizing that if she ever cheated, it would shatter me and our son. She assured me she had never done such a thing and never would. I found her lies to be more painful than the thought of betrayal itself. Good, I replied, because I would never want to harm you. I believed I had made my point clear, and she seemed wise enough to understand and take action. Her affair revealed a side of her that I hadn't anticipated. She mentioned attending a real estate symposium in Bakersfield for the weekend. I expressed my excitement and suggested I could join her there. That's not a good idea, she replied, explaining that she'd be in classes all day and would be too exhausted to spend time with me afterward. Plus, she added, Bakersfield was utterly dull, leaving me with nothing to occupy my time while she was in class. She planned to leave at 11 a.m. On Friday, from her office, I concurred with her decision not to go, and she appeared relieved. I recalled my mother's caution against using my firearms, which sparked a plan for retribution that I deemed clever. I descended to the basement and unlocked my gun safe, moving aside my Colt 19 11.45 caliber pistol and the Beretta 9mm, both acquired in recent years and registered with the state, leaving an unwanted, unmistakable trail back to me, much like Hansel and Gretel's breadcrumbs. Instead, I retrieved an old Browning .22 caliber. I had a pistol passed down from my father, who received it from his own father, predating any recorded gun sales. There was no traceable history of its purchase from over 70 years ago that could connect it to me or my family. I carefully donned latex gloves and disassembled the firearm, meticulously wiping away any fingerprints from the components and the bullets in the magazine before reassembling it. Disposing of the box of .22 caliber ammunition in a trash can a mile from my home ensured that no evidence remained of my ownership. Later, I made my way to a hardware store. On the opposite side of town, I discreetly purchased large zip ties capable of restraining individuals, all while donning a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses to evade security cameras. My strategy was straightforward but hinged on a stroke of good fortune. I also placed a call to the Bakersfield Casino and Hotel, establishing an alibi in case things took a turn for the worse. The following morning, I observed Scott departing for work and utilized the key he had mentioned was hidden in his planter to gain entry into his condo. Inside, I located his computer and began searching on Yahoo and Google for information related to various threats. Outfits. I realized that if they were departing Friday afternoon, I had just enough of a window to act. He would likely be packed by Thursday night, so I needed to find a way to access his suitcase. With no means to get into his car trunk, I decided to disable his vehicle, compelling him to use my wife's car, for which I possessed a key. On Thursday night, I took a walk, drove a block from Scott's house, and punctured 2 of his tires with nails that I had left in the pristine, obviously brand new tires. Then I drove home. The following morning, my wife got a call from Scott, and she went to pick him up for work. Everything seemed fine. I drove to my workplace, parked out of sight of the security cameras, clocked in, and then took a quick bathroom break. I made my way to my wife's office, parked a block away, and opened the trunk of her car. Wearing rubber gloves, I placed the handgun and zip ties into Scott's suitcase. After that, I returned to work, unnoticed for hours. Later, I received a panicked call from my wife. She was being arrested at the airport and needed me to post bail and hire a criminal lawyer for her. "What on earth are you doing at the airport?" I shouted. "It's complicated," she replied. "Let me talk to the cops," I insisted, striving to keep my composure. The TSA inspector clarified that my wife was with a man who attempted to board a plane with a gun and zip ties for restraining people. They were both under arrest, and my wife would be moved to a federal holding facility pending further investigation. I expressed my gratitude and ended the call. You likely wouldn't be shocked to find out that I didn't post bail or hire a lawyer. Her parents did. They also retrieved her car at their trial. My wife and Scott's defense was based on the theory that I had planted the gun and zip ties after I learned of their affair. Easy to claim, not so easy to prove. When the prosecution placed into evidence Scott's browser history of researching various terror outfits, the defense claimed that I broke in and did it, but they couldn't prove how, other than that I guessed where he hid a key to his place. From the look on the lawyer's face, even he seemed taken aback. I thought that was a stretch. Their lawyer grilled me for an hour on the witness stand, but never laid a glove on me. He asked about my gun collection, and I told him about the two guns I owned. One a .45 caliber, the other a 9mm. I had never owned a .22, I said. The police had checked my gun safe, and that officer's testimony corroborated my story. There was no record of me ever buying or owning such a gun. I had even made reservations for myself and our son at a hotel in Bakersfield, where she claimed she was going, saying I wanted to surprise my wife. Due to my belief in her narrative, my wife's attorney inquired whether I had slashed Scott's tires. I answered no. When her attorney pressed, asking if I expected the jury to think I was that oblivious to my wife's infidelity, I replied honestly, acknowledging that I wasn't naive. The attorney's eyes widened in surprise at my candid admission. Before he could respond, I continued, confessing that I was guilty of being an idiot and a total fool who loved and trusted my wife completely for 20 years. Naturally, the defense attorney objected, but the objection was overruled since he had raised the issue. During cross-examination, the U.S. attorney presented my time card for that day as evidence, demonstrating that I was at work and had no chance to plant any evidence. She then introduced my wife's iPhone, which was password protected and showed no spyware that would allow me to access its contents. The U.S. attorney also submitted a report from AAA Auto Club, indicating that the flat tires on Scott's car were caused by two nails, confirming that the tires had not been slashed. She inquired whether I had withdrawn any money from our joint bank accounts or canceled her credit cards. I altered my will, adjusted my life insurance, or ceased depositing my paycheck into our joint account prior to her arrest. Those are actions a man aware of his wife's infidelity would instinctively take. I had done none of those, which served as evidence that I was oblivious to my wife's affair. The U.S. attorney and I spent several hours discussing my testimony. She was relatively new to her role, and this was essentially her trial by fire. We connected well, and I found her sense of humor delightful as she laughed at. All my jokes landed well with her. She was an adorable brunette, albeit too young for me. While I was on the stand, she inquired if my wife went out for girls' nights. I replied that she didn't. Then she asked if my wife often returned home very late from work. I said rarely, but I did on occasion. We discussed all the telltale signs of a cheating spouse. She didn't have a secret stash of sexy lingerie, and I maintained that I saw no signs of infidelity. Otherwise, I would have immediately filed for divorce or, at the very least, hired a private detective to investigate, despite the defense attorney's success. In the process of excluding every divorced individual from the jury pool, both were ultimately found guilty. Scott received a 10-year prison sentence, while my wife was sentenced to 2 years for conspiracy. As they were led out of the courtroom, my wife collapsed, and 2 bailiffs had to carry my sobbing wife to the holding cell. Her lover attempted to break free from his bailiff, screaming threats against me, mimicking a gun with his thumb and forefinger. In response, I simply raised one finger, which I often refer to as my driving gesture. 2 days later, the charming U.S. attorney invited me to lunch, eager for me to meet her older sister, Carla. A 5th-grade teacher, Carla was just as delightful as her sister and only 2 years my junior. We dated for a few weeks, but ultimately, it didn't lead anywhere. I realized I wasn't ready for a relationship. I was grappling with too much anger and resentment to be good company for anyone. I asked her for a rain check until I could emotionally heal, and she kindly agreed. Meanwhile, my wife's ambitions to take everything I owned in a divorce began to fade, much like sunlight on a cold winter's day. In the evening, I found myself reflecting on my drastic measures, feeling a twinge of regret. Yet, they left me with no alternative. Someone was bound for prison, and I had to ensure it wasn't me. It all boiled down to who would make the first move. If they hadn't boasted about keeping me away from my son, I might not have acted as I did. There was no way I would allow them to ruin my bond with Arthur. That was the breaking point, the critical error that sealed their fate. 6 months later, my divorce was finalized, and my ex-wife, who had found herself on the wrong side of the law, received nothing from our separation. I took our son to visit his mother, but the damage was already done. He was in prison, but the trauma he experienced led me to decide against taking him to see her again, despite their mutual feelings. I reached out to Carla, and we started spending time together. I'm uncertain about the future of our relationship, but so far, I haven't noticed any red flags or warning signs. Carla seems to have a fondness for my homemade spaghetti, which is a perk of being raised by a Sicilian mother who taught me to cook. After I prepared clams casino and lasagna for her, Carla moved in with me. As for Scott, I have no idea what became of him in prison, and Darlene was now the property of Butch, her 300-pound mate, a former professional male wrestler who now claims to be a woman despite still having a tool that's California for you. He shaved Darlene's head to show that he owned her. She and Butch were in some federal prison for women, living la loco. Now for the second story. My name is Taryn. Please don't call me Terry. It points out my shortcomings and makes me sad. Terry is a name for a fun-loving, devil-may-care kind of guy pursued by beautiful, dangerous women. I'm not like that. I'm a serious science major. So ordinary and average that I feel almost invisible, particularly to women. I'm so plain and indistinguishable that I could easily pass as a great spy. If that weren't challenging enough in the realm of romance, I followed in my brilliant father's footsteps as a physics major and embraced a nonviolent, pacifist lifestyle like my Quaker mother. If I were to pen my autobiography, I would call it The Invisible Nonviolent Nerd. Despite my lifelong struggles with girls, I found myself unexpectedly pursued by 2 beautiful college co-eds during my freshman year. I seemed to have an allure that captivated foreign girls, a stark contrast to the American girls in high school who deemed me dull. So, it was quite a shock when my stunning ex, Anastasia, whom I affectionately refer to as the Dragon Lady, took the life of my beautiful new girlfriend, Lana. I never realized I had a quality that could drive an exotic beauty to such extremes. As a physicist, I'm accustomed to unraveling mysteries. Yet women remain an enigma I've yet to decipher, even on the very first day of my freshman year in the autumn semester. In college, I encountered Anastasia, whom I affectionately dubbed the Dragon Lady. We crossed paths in the cafeteria and coincidentally shared all the same classes. She bore a striking resemblance to the Asian femme fatale from the comic book and TV series Terry and the Pirates, which I used to watch on cable. Among the boys in the cafeteria, most of whom were taller and more attractive than I, she chose to sit beside me and strike up a conversation. I often felt like a complete fool when it came to women and what to say to them. It was a challenge, but I managed to keep my composure and awkwardly inquired why she was talking to me. Instead of glancing at the more dashing boys at the next table, she confessed that intelligent men were her weakness. I could barely catch my breath. She wore a traditional Chinese turtleneck silk dress, a cheongsam, adorned with a silk screen depicting a fire-breathing dragon on the back. The Dragon Lady was stunning, captivating, and enigmatic. There was an air of danger about her, and to be frank, one might even describe her as sinister. Her long black hair framed her face, and her dark eyes seemed to see right through me. That should have been my cue to escape, yet I found myself falling in love instead. I could tally on one hand the women who had ever shown me any interest. In fact, I could manage it with just one finger. She had an accent I couldn't place, and she was tight-lipped about its origin. Once a week, she would vanish for a few hours, never revealing her whereabouts or activities. Her affection fell short of my hopes, and at times, I felt more like a child under her watch than a partner. She claimed to enjoy her air of mystery. While the rest of us navigated our cramped dorms, she resided in a stunning penthouse. I stayed in a high-rise apartment with her, but for the first 2 weeks, she wouldn't sleep with me. I was so excited, I felt like I was climbing the walls. For our 2-year anniversary, I bought us 2 sets of rollerblades, complete with wrist and knee guards, and we rollerblade together along the bike path by the ocean, hand in hand. It marked a significant change in our relationship. She was so thrilled by my gift of rollerblades that you might have thought I had bought her a Ferrari. She had never had rollerblades or skates before. A child who had always yearned for companionship, she truly opened up to me, and I sensed genuine affection from her on multiple occasions. Men in suits captured photographs of us as we skated, their demeanor far from that of tourists. They resembled agents so closely that it felt as if they should have had FBI emblazoned on their foreheads. My familiarity with the appearance of FBI agents stemmed from my father's secretive scientific work for the government, which subjected our family to stringent semi-annual security checks by the FBI. I was well aware. Never to discuss his work with anyone. That night after we rollerblade, we slept together for the first time. It was the greatest night of my life. The Dragon Lady instantly knew there's a first time for everyone. "Let me teach you how to pleasure a woman," she whispered. It was the greatest class I ever took. Judging by her reaction, I passed the final. So now we were Terran and the Dragon Lady. Anastasia didn't understand the reference until later when I showed her some Terry and the Pirates comic books. She laughed so hard that tears came out. Her eyes sparkled as she kissed me, and in that moment, I felt as if I had just stepped up to the plate for the first time and hit a grand slam. Our connection was strong, filled with mutual respect, though there was one playful disagreement. She couldn't fathom the amount of sugar I added to my coffee, dubbing me her pre-diabetic lover. She had this quirky habit. Whenever we strolled arm in arm, her right hand had to be tucked into her jacket's right pocket, only holding my hand with her left. I found it amusing but kept my thoughts to myself. One evening, after indulging in some Thai food, Anastasia complained of an upset stomach. For at least an hour, I pressed a cold, wet washcloth to her forehead as she leaned over the toilet, retching. "I hit the jackpot when I found you," Anastasia murmured before another wave of nausea hit her. Typically, she exuded strength and resilience in our relationship, but witnessing her vulnerability in this moment was captivating. Caring for her that evening not only made me feel more capable, but also deepened our connection. I may not have been the archetypal macho figure, yet I instinctively knew how to nurture the woman I loved. As I reflected on this, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. Overwhelmed by the profound realization that I was experiencing love for the very first time, I finally grasped the essence of being in love. It was nothing short of extraordinary. For 6 weeks, life was not merely good, it was truly great. My financial situation was tight, yet she seemed unfazed, never voicing any concerns. The wardrobe in her closet likely surpassed the value of my car, but that didn't matter. I took her to the zoo, the Griffith Observatory, and various other free cultural venues, and we created wonderful memories without spending much. I eagerly anticipated our next adventure together. Home to meet my parents one Saturday night, we ventured to see a play in downtown Los Angeles. She looked exceptionally stunning, her hair elegantly pinned up with a long, sharp Chinese-style hairpin. Unable to afford the parking lot, I found a free space a few blocks from the theater. After the show, as we strolled back to the deserted street, 3 imposing figures loomed next to my car, blocking our path. Uncertain of how to respond, I was taken aback, but she remained unfazed. Her laughter only seemed to infuriate them further. One of them brandished handcuffs in his hand, while the other. 2 aimed guns were directed at us. The Dragon Lady's right hand, as always, rested inside her coat pocket, where she seemingly concealed a weapon. In a swift motion, she fired through the fabric, hitting one assailant in the chest and the other 2 in the head. The man struck in the chest lunged at her, knocking the gun from her grasp. Anastasia pivoted, delivering a sharp kick to his face that momentarily halted his advance. In a fluid motion, she retrieved a long, sharp hairpin from her hair and plunged it into his silent neck, effectively ending his attack. Afterward, she bent down to retrieve her snub-nosed Colt from the ground. A Python 357 Magnum revolver with a soft hammer, She placed a round into his head as he gasped on his own blood. A nondescript vent screeched away, leaving no trace. She remained unfazed, taking my hand as we hurried to my parked car. She casually mentioned her annoyance at ruining her beautiful coat. To say I was completely unnerved barely scratches the surface of my emotions. "Who are you?" I asked. She simply smiled, offering no reply. "Are you some kind of spy or assassin?" I pressed. "Well, I suppose I could be both, but let's just say I'm a girl who was once mugged," she replied with a hint of mystery, "and is now always prepared." Then she took out her cell phone, made a call, and whispered what sounded like, "Clean up 2 blocks south of the Dorothy Chandler on Grand Avenue on the east side of the street." But I was so upset that I can't be sure that's what she said. I didn't know why she had to kill them. If it was a mugging, we should have just given them our money. Though I was puzzled why one of them held handcuffs in his hands. My mother was a Quaker, and that's how I was raised. Nonviolent pacifists. Loving a killer tore my heart out. I tried to weigh my affection for Anastasia against the principles instilled in me, especially after witnessing her take the lives of 3 men. I could never introduce my fierce, lethal partner to my peace-loving mother. I spent the entire night wrestling with my thoughts, and by morning, I reached a conclusion. I told her I would keep her secret about the shooting, but I could no longer be with her. Her violence contradicted everything I cherished. She accepted my decision, tears glistening in her eyes as she pressed a kiss to my right cheek. With a heavy heart, I gathered my suitcase and departed her apartment, the sound of her lingering behind me. In hushed tones, I confess my deep affection for you. I found myself in my car, tears streaming down my face for what felt like an eternity before I could drive away. How could I harbor such feelings for someone so heartless, a cold killer? It baffles me how she could take a life so effortlessly while being so tender and loving towards me. The complexities of women are beyond my grasp. We shared the same space every day in class, yet our words were few. A mere nod exchanged in the cafeteria, where I sat with friends while she remained solitary, 100 feet away. The ache of missing her was profound, and the urge to rush over and kiss her was strong, yet I held back. The truth is, as deeply as I loved her, I was equally gripped by fear of her. A week passed, and the turmoil within me only grew. Later, I found myself rollerblading solo along the bike path, lost in thoughts of Anastasia. Suddenly, an incredibly beautiful girl lost her balance, and we both tumbled down together. My pants were torn, but thankfully, we were unhurt, and laughter filled the air. She offered to buy me a coffee as a way to make amends, which I eagerly accepted. During our extended coffee break, she revealed that she had 2 tickets to a jazz club and wanted to go on a date with me that weekend. I adored jazz, and the excitement bubbled within me as she became increasingly touchy-feely. She shared stories about her family, revealing that both her parents were police officers. I mentioned that my dad was a scientist and my mom taught 4th grade at a Quaker school. Her interest was piqued, and she expressed a desire to meet them. That evening, we had dinner together, and the atmosphere was wonderful. She engaged in conversation with my father just as much as she did with me, and I noticed her complete disregard for my mother. For a brief moment, I wondered if she was flirting with my dad. With her scientific background, she posed questions about his work, showing genuine curiosity. I had the chance to visit his lab, and despite having a few drinks, he remained tight-lipped about her questions. He cracked the Tom Cruise joke from Top Gun, saying that if he revealed anything, he'd have to kill her, and we all shared a laugh. He expressed pride in my pursuit of a scientific career, which meant a lot to me. While my feelings for Lana didn't quite match the intensity one had for Anastasia, I genuinely liked her and thought there was potential for something deeper. With the newfound self-confidence I gained from my relationship with Anastasia, I felt more appealing to women. That night, we met outside the club and decided to head inside together. We encountered 2 of her male friends and decided to share a table, which turned out to be a fantastic night. I truly appreciated her presence and the company of her friends, despite their names being a bit tricky for me. They seemed genuinely captivated by everything I said, laughing at all my jokes, which made me feel incredibly special. Lana was quite affectionate, and I felt like I was on top of the world. The guys kept the drinks coming, and I ended up indulging a bit too much, far more than the rest of our group. With some assistance, I made my way out of the club, feeling quite the experience. I was too intoxicated to drive, and I consented as they led me toward their panel van. I paused to catch my breath when Lana slid open the side door, and the others began to guide and push me inside. Suddenly, 3 shots rang out. From my past encounters with the Dragon Lady, I instantly recognized the thunderous crack of a .357 Magnum. The Dragon Lady and 2 men emerged from another panel van, charging toward me while firing their weapons. In an instant, Lana and one of the men were decapitated, and the third lay on the ground, desperately pulling out a gun. He aimed it at Anastasia. I still loved her. I couldn't let him hurt her. I acted on instinct, pushing the gun aimed at my Dragon Lady into his chest while forcing his finger to pull the trigger, killing him instantly. I felt a wave of shame wash over me, and I began to vomit into the gutter. Anastasia administered Autograce to Lana and her 2 friends, then ransacked their pockets, taking their wallets and cell phones. She asked if I was all right and tried to kiss me, but I pushed her away. They forced me into their van, while one of Dragon Lady's associates sped off in another vehicle with the 3 lifeless bodies. Despite my earlier intoxication, clarity struck me like a bolt of lightning. I had just taken a life. How could I have done such a thing? I was a pacifist. What on earth had just transpired? Dragon Lady handed me a thermos filled with coffee and commanded me to drink. I had no intention of challenging a cold-blooded killer, so I complied. My judgment, clouded by alcohol, led me to ask if they had any sugar for the coffee, which made Anastasia burst into laughter. They drove into a warehouse, and we proceeded inside. Up to an apartment in a freight elevator. I was now sober enough to feel fear and kept my mouth shut. They spread dozens of photos on the dining room table. Lana, her 2 friends, and 5 others who seemed to have been stalking me for the past 2 weeks. Who are you and who are they? I thought I was sober, but I was still so confused that nothing made sense. Dragon Lady spoke as she handed me a cup of coffee and some sugar. We're from the Ukrainian intelligence agency. Ukrainian? But you're Asian, I said. I'm half Asian, she replied. Your late girlfriend isn't named Lana. Her name is Svetlana Perova. She and her associates were involved in a kidnapping and hit team for the FSB, the Russian Ministry of Intelligence. Anastasia stated that Artem took the floor, revealing that Russia has assembled thousands of bomb-carrying drones aimed at destroying Ukraine. Your father has successfully developed electronic countermeasures to make the Russian drones crash. The Russians intended to kidnap you and threaten your life unless your father disclosed how his countermeasures could be bypassed. Anastasia spoke. I was assigned to shadow and protect you. That's why we were ambushed outside the play we saw that night. Unfortunately, they didn't give up. It actually worked out well that you broke up with me. It enabled us to flush them all out. I think I looked like a lovesick puppy when I said to Anastasia, "You used me as bait, so I was just a job for you." She took my hand. Yes, at the beginning, but it turned into something more, a lot more for me. Artem put his hand on my shoulder. You're all she's talked about for the past month. You must. It felt incredibly special, and I think I blushed. I was deeply conflicted. Raised as a nonviolent pacifist, I was taught to reject violence, even at the cost of my own life. Anastasia had saved me twice, yet her actions had resulted in the deaths of 6 people. My upbringing screamed that this was wrong, that she was in the wrong. But on the other hand, her choices had allowed me to continue living, and I cherished life. My mother's beliefs were a noble ideal, but I now grasped the harsh reality of kill or be killed. I came to the conclusion that it is morally acceptable to take the life of a murderer if it serves a greater purpose in the end. Saves lives, particularly when one of those lives is my own or the woman I cherished. I reflected on the countless hours spent in philosophical debates at Quaker schools about nonviolence. Yet, in this moment, the decision felt straightforward. It was a matter of life or death, them or us. It seemed so simple and clear. A man attempted to take the life of the woman I loved, and I acted first. I grappled with the guilt of not feeling guilty. I sought to justify my actions as self-defense for another, but the principles of my faith do not recognize that justification. Exceptionally, I found myself no longer a Quaker. The instinct to survive took precedence. An hour later, with ample time for reflection, I wouldn't alter my decision. Anastasia grasped my hand, acknowledging my beliefs. She inquired about my feelings after taking a life. At this moment, I grasped the essence of the Quaker faith more profoundly. Generally, it embodies a beautiful philosophy, yet it does not equate to a pact of self-destruction. Perhaps other Quakers might disagree, but we must persist. Each of us makes our own choices. That's the core of autonomy. What about the others in these photos? I asked. Anastasia glanced at her watch earlier this evening. They were also eliminated. Will they continue to pursue me? I asked, my nerves getting the better of me as I tapped my toes. Artem spoke with a grave tone. We believe so, but now they'll be even more determined to get to you because they've lost over 10 of their top agents. Oh great, what do I do now? I buried my face in my hands. Dragon Lady placed her hand on my back and gently rubbed it. You can stay here until they choose between a grim fate or a promising future with me, where a full scholarship awaits you at the Institute for Science in KF. By the time you graduate, advancements in technology will render your father's work obsolete, ensuring your safety. All fears of exile and danger have vanished from my thoughts. When you say live with you, do you mean that the Dragon Lady drew me closer? Yes, you are indeed an acquired taste, but you've grown on me. I was honest from the start. I am only attracted to exceptionally intelligent men, and you are among the brightest. I decided to go to Ukraine, whispering to myself that I felt I had no choice. One of the guys made a phone call, and before I knew it, we were on our way to Long Beach Harbor. The Dragon Lady warned us that the airport wouldn't be safe. The Russians would be on the lookout for us there. We boarded a ship, bound for an uncertain destination, with Ukraine as our ultimate goal. The next morning, we found ourselves at sea. I strolled the deck with Anastasia and the others, wrapping my arms around her as I confessed my love. She kissed me back, affirming, I love you too. Terrence, I wrapped my arms around Anastasia. I no longer feel like a Terran Dragon Lady. From now on, you can call me Terry. She gestured to her 3 associates, each sporting a shoulder holster, just like me, of course. Terry, and these are your pirates, dear listeners. Sending loads of love to Ronald Burns for his contribution, and to all our listeners, thank you for being part of this literary journey with us. You can check out Ron's work on Amazon. We've shared the links in the description box below. If you want to share your work, please send your work to the email provided in the description box, and we will feature it for our listeners at Cracked Love Chronicles. We welcome your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.